He called her the woman at the dinner table. Not a stranger, his wife of 40 years, sitting right across from him, and he looked at her and said, "The woman wants more water." She didn't correct him, she just poured the water. Because she'd been watching it happen for 3 years, and nobody had believed her. Most people think dementia announces itself. One morning you forget something important, and that's when it starts. But that's not how it works. The signs are there years before anyone notices, and they don't look like what you'd expect. My name is Dr. Anika Mehta. I've looked at the scans. I've sat with the families afterward, and what I keep seeing is the same thing. People who were told everything was fine for years when it wasn't. In this video, I'm going to show you the 3 signs his wife saw. I'll explain the biology behind why those particular signs appear first, before memory fails, before anyone thinks to run a test. And I'll show you what you can do tonight, not next month, tonight, to slow this process down. But first, you need to understand what's actually happening inside the brain. Because once you see it, everything else makes complete sense. Alzheimer's pathology doesn't begin the day someone forgets a name. It begins 15 to 20 years earlier, when a protein called amyloid starts accumulating in the brain's tissue. Silently, with no symptoms. The synaptic connections between neurons start fraying while the person is still holding a job, driving a car, passing every cognitive test their doctor gives them. The brain is extraordinarily good at compensating. When one pathway gets damaged, it reroutes. It finds a workaround. This is why the early signs don't look like disease. They look like personality quirks, distraction, stress, getting older. The brain is masking the damage so effectively that even the person living inside it doesn't register anything wrong. Now here's the part that I find most important to understand, because it connects directly to what you can actually do about this. Your brain doesn't clean itself during the day. It does almost all of its waste clearance at night, during deep sleep, through a system called the glymphatic system. Think of it as the brain's overnight sanitation crew, a drainage network that flushes out toxic proteins, including amyloid, through channels in the brain's tissue. This system is nearly inactive while you're awake. It runs almost entirely during slow-wave sleep, the deepest stage, in the hours after you first fall asleep. Imagine a city where the sanitation trucks only operate between 2 and 5 in the morning. If those trucks run every night without interruption, the streets stay clean. But miss enough nights, or run those trucks at half capacity for years, and the waste starts piling up in the streets. After 60, the glymphatic system gets less efficient. The channels narrow, the trucks run slower. Less amyloid gets cleared each night than the night before. So by the time a neurologist looks at a scan and says early stage, the brain has already been fighting a losing sanitation battle for years. The diagnosis isn't the beginning of the disease. It's the moment the compensation finally breaks down. That's the silent window. And what makes it so disorienting for families is that the signs during this period don't look like disease. They look like personality, habit, the ordinary texture of someone getting older. His wife saw them. She just didn't have the language for what she was watching. The first sign his wife noticed wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel like a warning. It felt like nothing. He started taking the long way home. Not because of traffic, not because he wanted to. He just did it, and when she asked why, he didn't have an answer. He'd stand in the doorway of the kitchen for a moment before walking in. A half-second pause, like he was orienting himself. He'd reach for his coffee mug on the counter and misjudge the distance slightly, his hand arriving a little too far to the left. She noticed. He didn't. This is what spatial hesitation actually looks like. Not getting lost in a foreign city, not wandering out of the house at midnight. It's a fractional pause in a place that should feel completely automatic. A moment of, where am I? In the kitchen you've stood in for 30 years. The person experiencing it usually doesn't register it at all. The person watching them does. The biology here is specific, and it matters. Deep inside the brain, the entorhinal cortex and the hippocampus work together as the brain's internal navigation system. They build and maintain mental maps, not just of streets and buildings, but of every familiar environment you move through daily. Your kitchen, your staircase, the car you've driven for a decade. These two regions are among the first places in the brain where amyloid tangles form in Alzheimer's. Before memory, before language, before any test a doctor runs in a standard office visit picks anything up. The damage starts there, in the GPS, and it shows up as hesitation before it shows up as anything else. A UCL study published in 2024 tested cognitively normal adults who were at higher risk for Alzheimer's. No symptoms, no diagnosis, using virtual reality navigation tasks. Researchers found measurable spatial impairments in these individuals up to 25 years before estimated symptom onset. Not forgetfulness, not confusion, navigation hesitation, detectable decades ahead of any clinical diagnosis. The reason doctors keep missing this is that standard cognitive screening tools simply don't test for it. A person can score perfectly on a memory assessment, answer every question correctly, walk out of the appointment with a clean bill of health, and still have meaningful entorhinal damage that a VR navigation test would catch immediately. The tools medicine reaches for aren't looking in the right place. What you should actually watch for: hesitation before a familiar turn while driving, a pause at the top of the stairs before descending, slightly misjudging where a familiar object sits on a shelf. These aren't senior moments. They're navigational errors in environments that should be encoded so deeply they require zero conscious thought. His wife saw 3 years of these pauses. She thought he seemed distracted, tired, maybe stressed at work. Nobody told her that the brain's GPS degrades before anything else does. That spatial hesitation is the canary, and the coal mine comes later. Spatial hesitation is the sign families miss because it genuinely looks like nothing. What came next was easier to notice, but the explanation his wife was given made it just as easy to set aside. He stopped using her name. Not all at once, gradually. She noticed it first in passing. He'd say her instead of her name. The kids instead of their children's names. She assumed it was just the way people talk when they're comfortable, the casual shorthand of a long marriage. But it kept happening, and it spread. He called the television remote the channel thing. He'd point at the coffee maker and say, "That thing, you know, the hot one." The words weren't gone, they were replaced. She mentioned it to their GP. The GP said it sounded like normal aging. It wasn't. What she was watching is called the noun gap, and it's one of the clearest early signals of cognitive decline that routinely gets dismissed as stress, tiredness, or simply getting older. The distinction matters, and once you understand it, you'll never confuse the two again. Everyone has tip-of-tongue moments. Your mid-sentence and the name of an actor, a street, a colleague just won't surface. You pause, you reach for it, and usually, within a few seconds or a few minutes, it comes back. That's normal aging. The retrieval system slows down a little, but it still works. The word returns. In early cognitive decline, It doesn't return. The person substitutes. They say, "You know what I mean," and move on. They develop workarounds, describing the object instead of naming it, gesturing at it, waiting for you to fill in the blank. And here's what makes this clinically significant. They often don't notice the gap themselves. The substitution feels natural to them. They're not struggling for the word. They've simply stopped expecting it to be there. There's a specific biological reason why names go before almost everything else, and it's not what most people assume. The biology sits in the temporal lobe, specifically in regions that handle semantic memory, the long-term storage of facts, concepts, and the names we assign to everything in our world. This area is affected early in Alzheimer's progression, particularly for proper nouns. Names are the hardest category to retrieve because they're stored with almost no supporting context. A name is just a name, with no definition attached, no sensory anchor. When the temporal lobe starts losing integrity, proper nouns go first. The names of people your brain knows better than almost anyone else on the planet. Forgetting a colleague's name at a work function is unremarkable. Consistently substituting your wife's name with her across months of daily conversation is not. That's the naming system failing, not the retrieval system slowing. What makes this sign so difficult for families to catch is that the conversations still flow. The person isn't incoherent. They're not repeating themselves. They're just quietly shifting away from specific language toward vague descriptors. And the people around them fill in the gaps so automatically that nobody notices the gap was there. Research looking at spouse-reported language changes found that partners detect these patterns an average of 3.5 years before any formal diagnosis, and are frequently told by doctors that they're overreacting. The spouses aren't overreacting. They're watching something real without the clinical language to name what they're seeing. Language drift is subtle enough that most families write it off as stress or tiredness. But the third sign, this one tends to get misdiagnosed entirely. He used to plan everything, every holiday, every restaurant, every Friday night. He was the one who'd say, "Let's try that new place on the corner," or, "I booked us a weekend away." His wife described him as someone who moved through life with intention, someone who initiated, who reached toward things. That was just who he was. And then, slowly, he stopped. It didn't happen in a week. Over about 2 years, he shifted from the person who started conversations to the person who waited for them. He started saying, "Whatever you want," to questions he used to have strong opinions about. He stopped suggesting things. He stopped being curious about new things. When she'd propose an idea, a trip, a dinner with friends, he'd agree, but the agreement was hollow. He was there, but less present, less himself. She brought it up with their doctor. The doctor prescribed antidepressants. He wasn't depressed. This distinction matters clinically, and it's one of the most common misdiagnoses in the early dementia pathway. Depression involves suffering. It involves sadness, a sense of hopelessness. A person who is aware something is wrong and feels the weight of it. What his wife was observing was different. A quiet reduction in engagement, a flattening of initiative. A person who wasn't sad so much as simply less present, less driven by curiosity, less interested in the friction of new experiences. Clinicians call this apathy, and it's not a mood state, it's a neurological symptom. The prefrontal cortex sits behind your forehead and handles some of the most distinctly human things your brain does. Planning, initiative, the motivation to reach towards something that doesn't exist yet. When this region starts losing synaptic density, the person doesn't become sad. They become passive. They stop generating ideas. They stop initiating. Their personality narrows towards safety and routine, away from anything that requires cognitive effort. What makes this so easy to miss is that the person remains functional. They can hold a conversation, they get dressed, make coffee, watch television. From the outside, they seem fine, but the people who know them well, a spouse, a close friend, can feel the absence of the person they used to know. Research tracking informant-rated personality changes found that when the people closest to someone report noticeable behavioral shifts, the likelihood of a dementia diagnosis within 2 years doubles. But those personality changes don't begin at the 2-year mark. They appear years earlier in quieter forms. The gradual retreat from planning, the slow disappearance of spontaneity, the increasing preference for the familiar over anything new. What families should watch for? A person who used to initiate but now consistently defers. Someone who starts avoiding social situations that require keeping up with multiple conversations. Someone who seems irritable or anxious, specifically in unfamiliar or busy environments. These aren't character flaws. They're the prefrontal cortex working harder than it used to, just to manage situations that used to feel easy. His wife watched this for 3 years and thought he was burning out from work. His wife saw all 3. She named them to every doctor she spoke to. And none of that slowed anything down. Because knowing what the signs are and knowing what to do about them are 2 completely different things. So now you understand the window. The question is what you do inside it. The most powerful tool you have for slowing amyloid accumulation isn't a medication. It isn't a supplement. It's deep sleep. Specifically, slow-wave NREM sleep, the kind your body produces in the first few hours after you fall asleep. That's when the glymphatic system does roughly 90% of its clearing work. That's when the interstitial channels open up and the waste moves out. Everything else we're about to discuss is in service of protecting that window. Let's start with the thing most people are doing wrong right now. If you're using a phone, tablet, or television after 9 p.m., you're cutting into the first sleep cycle in a way that directly reduces slow-wave activity. Blue-enriched light from screens suppresses melatonin and keeps the brain's arousal systems active. The result isn't just that you fall asleep a little later. The result is that the first cycle of deep sleep, the most productive window for glymphatic clearance, is shallower than it should be. Less depth means less drainage. Less drainage means more amyloid left behind. Screens after 9 p.m. aren't a sleep hygiene issue in the abstract. They're a brain drainage issue with a specific, measurable biological mechanism. The second thing that disrupts this process is eating late. A heavy meal in the evening raises blood glucose, and elevated glucose at night disrupts sleep architecture in a way that specifically reduces time in slow-wave sleep. Animal studies have shown that peripheral hyperglycemia raises amyloid levels in the brain's interstitial fluid. Human data links even a single night of disrupted sleep to measurable increases in amyloid burden in the hippocampus and thalamus. When you eat a large meal at 9 p.m. and lie down 2 hours later, your body is still managing a glucose response while it's trying to shift into deep sleep. Those 2 demands conflict. Finish eating by 7 p.m. if you can. Your brain will spend more of the night clearing waste instead of managing your dinner. Temperature is the one people are least likely to have heard about, and it's the easiest to fix. It's also the only factor on this list that can quietly undo the benefit of everything else, even if your eating and screen habits are already dialed in. Your core body temperature needs to drop for the glymphatic system to activate fully. It's part of the same biological sequence. Temperature falls, sleep deepens, drainage increases. A bedroom above 72 degrees Fahrenheit keeps your body working to shed heat throughout the night, which keeps you in lighter sleep stages longer. The optimal range for supporting deep sleep and maximizing lymphatic clearance is between 64 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's it. One thermostat adjustment. Sleep position is the fourth piece, and it's the one that surprises people most. Research comparing lateral sleeping to back sleeping found that the lymphatic channels clear more efficiently on your side. When you sleep on your back, the brain tissue compresses differently against the skull, and the drainage flow is less effective. Side sleeping enhances the geometry of the interstitial space in ways that make the whole system work better. It costs nothing. Roll over. 4 changes. Finish eating by 7 p.m. No screens after 9 p.m. Room temperature between 64 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Sleep on your side. One thing I hear frequently, but I've always been a good sleeper. I sleep 8 hours and I wake up feeling fine. I want to address this directly. Feeling rested and efficiently clearing amyloid are not the same thing. Lymphatic function declines with age, regardless of how well you subjectively sleep. You can wake up feeling perfectly refreshed and still be clearing significantly less amyloid than you were 10 years ago. The subjective experience of sleep doesn't track the biology, the habits do. The Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention identified 14 modifiable risk factors that together account for nearly half of all dementia cases globally. Nearly half. That's not a small number. Sleep quality and the habits that protect it sit at the center of that list, connected to blood pressure, metabolic health, and the one biological process that determines how much amyloid your brain carries into tomorrow morning. And those 4 habits are genuinely worth protecting. But there's something else working in the background that most people haven't accounted for yet. And if you don't know what it is, it quietly works against everything you just fixed. The brain doesn't signal distress the way the rest of the body does. It doesn't send pain. It doesn't trigger a fever. What it does instead is start producing changes in behavior, shifts so gradual and so easy to explain away that by the time anyone pays attention, years have already passed. Now you know what those shifts look like, and you know what to do tonight to slow the process down. But that's only one half of this. The next video covers the body symptoms, physical signals that show up during the same silent window before anything appears on a scan. Most people either miss them entirely or explain them away. That video is on your screen right now, and it's the part that completes this picture. Go watch it next.